Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's GSA virtual info session, all about our instrumental music program. It's so great to have you join us. I see our participants are kind of plateauing as they enter, so we'll go ahead and begin on today's program. First off, if you've done one of these before, you know the drill. We have the opportunity to see who all is here today, but I'd love for you all to have a sense of who all is in our virtual room as well. So if you can, jump in the chat feature, set it to messaging all attendees, and say hello to everyone. Maybe tell us where you're from, your first name, just so you all get a sense of who's in the room as well. Maybe tell us your instrument if you want to. Hey, Sean. Hello, Ella. Hi, Kim. Awesome. Hi, Isaac. Awesome. So feel free to keep chiming in there, and you all are welcome to, if you'd like, to use the chat feature to connect with each other during today's presentation. But it's great just to have a sense of where folks are coming from in the state and the variety of instruments we have represented today. I'm also going to launch a poll just to learn a little bit more about you. So we're just asking, if you're a student, if you're a parent, also let us know if you attended or previous GSA virtual info session, or if you've had a chance to watch a recording of one. And we're just curious if you've read the applicant guide for instrumental music. So it's okay if you haven't. It's okay if you haven't watched the previous GSA virtual info session. We're going to cover all that in a bit, but we're just kind of curious what you've had a chance to look over so far. All right, so we got a percussionist. Hello to our mom in Richmond. Thanks for joining us, Mom. All right, I'm gonna give this poll just a couple more seconds here. All right, so let's see what we got. Oops, let's see. So it looks like a majority of those of you joining us today are students, so good for you for taking your application into your own hands. And welcome to the parents joining us as well. Looks like a lot of you have watched a virtual info session before, and majority of you have read the applicant guide. So you're in pretty good shape, but don't worry, like I said, we're gonna make sure that you know as much as possible about instrumental music today, and at the very least, we're gonna make sure that you know where to find more information if needed. But first, I want to start off by introducing myself and then introducing our guest today. My name is Nick Cobalt. I'm the director of the Governor's School for the Arts. I'm also a proud alum of our vocal music program, and I am so happy today to be joined by Dr. Rich Bird. He is the chair of our instrumental music faculty and also an adjudicator for GSA. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Bird to introduce himself. Hello, Dr. Bird.
Hello. Hi, Nick. How you doing?
Good.
Good to see you.
You too.
Excited with all these people here. This is gonna be great.
Yeah.
My name is Rich Bird, Dr. Bird, and I'm from Lexington, Kentucky, and I teach at the Eastern Kentucky University. I teach music theory there, and I am a freelance trumpet player in the Central Kentucky area. And I've been teaching at EKU for about 14 years now, but I've been teaching longer at GSA since 1989. If you want to do the math, that's a lot of years. And in that time, I do want to say, since this is involving students, that two of the students that I'm especially excited about, who are alums, were my children. They went through the program, both in instrumental music. My son Zachary was a trumpet player. I'm a trumpet player too, and he went through instrumental music. And then 3 years later, my daughter, named Sarah, also went through instrumental music as a pianist. And now she is at the University of Louisville in her junior year, double majoring in both piano performance and vocal performance. So
Awesome. Pretty talented family. Well, Rich, thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to learn a little bit more about instrumental music. Before we dive into the conversation specific to instrumental music, I'm just going to take us through a quick presentation of some overview about general GSA facts, non-art form specific. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll get started with that portion of the presentation, and then we'll come back to Rich and learn more about instrumental music specifically. So, again, welcome to today's session, all about instrumental music. There is going to be time, just so you know, at the end of today's session for Q&A. So I just ask that you put your questions in the Q&A feature in Zoom, which is different from the chat feature. So you're welcome to use the chat to connect with each other if you want, but if you have questions, put them in the Q&A feature, and we'll come back to those at the end of the presentation today. So you're probably here because you want to know about GSA summer program. So let's review. GSA summer program is a 3-week residential program that will take place in 2021 at the University of Kentucky from June 27th until July 17th. Students attend GSA for one of 9 art forms, and the program is completely tuition-free. While it's too soon to know what the coming months will bring, GSA is currently anticipating that the summer program will take place in person, even if there must be additional health and safety protocols put in place. So you're going to hear us talk today about the summer program as though it were going to be in person, with the assumption that it will be in person. All GSA 2021 applicants must complete an online application that is due by end of day, January 10th. From there, some applicants will be invited to advance to a second and final round of auditions and reviews. Applicants learn whether they've advanced that final round on February 19th. For those who do advance, their final audition or review will take place on March 19th or 20th. We're still determining whether the final round will take place in person or virtually, and plan on releasing more information by the finalist announcement on February 19th. So hang tight, more to come there. Finally, GSA releases the list of accepted students for GSA 2021 on April 16th. We'll also announce a list of alternates for the summer program on that day. Students must currently be a sophomore or a junior to apply for GSA. We're not going to ask for your GPA, SAT, or ACT scores during this process, and you can apply for up to 2 art forms. I'll make a note because we're talking to instrumentalists. You can apply to GSA for up to 2 instruments, but that does count as your 2 art forms. So really a way to think about it is that you can have up to 2 applications for GSA, and those can either be 2 instruments, or they can be an instrument and another one of our 8 art forms. Or you can just apply for 1 art form or 1 instrument. That's totally cool too. There is an application fee of $30 or $35 total if you're applying for 2 art forms or 2 instruments. But that fee is completely waived with a click of a button in the application for students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. Well, we are thrilled to talk to you today about instrumental music at GSA, and we're confident that today is going to be helpful for you. Remember that today's virtual info session is not going to be 100% comprehensive, and there are some other very important resources that you should utilize to learn more about the program and the application, all of which are available on our website or linkable from our website at kentuckygsa.org. Be sure to read the applicant guide for your art forms of interest. We're going to review the applicant guide as part of today's conversation, but it's not going to be fully comprehensive, so be sure to take time to carefully review it yourself. And also remember that today's virtual info session is part of a series of virtual info sessions that you can review or attend this fall. We started back in October. Recordings of each of these are available on our website. Our first webinar was GSA 101, which was just an overview of the application process and what to expect at the summer program. We had a second webinar where we talked about applicant guides and how to use them, and a third webinar where we actually walked the GSA application portal step by step so you can see what it's like to complete and submit an application. In addition to the art form specific webinars that are taking place this week, and they started the week before Thanksgiving, all of which are being recorded, and that includes today, we're going to have one final open Q&A virtual info session on December 17th. And remember, you can contact us directly at any time with your specific questions. You just give us an email at gsainfo@kentuckyperformingarts.org. If you prefer a phone call, just email us your number and when we can reach you. There are no scary adults at GSA waiting to judge you. We love chatting with our applicants, and it is our pleasure and also our job to help you out. So if your question is not answered today, or if you come up with one afterward, please don't hesitate to reach out to us via email. And just so you know, we're on social media as well. We've got our information for Facebook and Instagram up there. And as a couple final pieces of advice, just remember to start your application as soon as you possibly can, and because that's going to allow you to get your questions answered as soon as possible. So we're going to be closed intermittently around the holidays. So if you think about the application being due January 10th, don't wait until we're back in the office in January to be answering your questions, right? So if you haven't already started your application, started researching what you have to upload and provide, go ahead and do so now, but you're on the right track just by watching today's webinar. I already mentioned there will be a Q&A at the end of today's session, and after you log out of, or after I end the session today, you will receive a survey about the info session, and I just ask that you please complete that because it's super helpful to GSA as we assess our recruitment efforts. So without that, without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. I'm going to pull up the GSA applicant guide for instrumental music, and we are going to start talking about our instrumental music program with Dr. Rich Bird. All right. So when you pull up the GSA applicant guide for instrumental music, this is what you will see on our website. And how this is going to work is we're going to review each section. I'll go over what's in the section, and then we'll talk to Dr. Bird a little bit more about his thoughts on how he uses this information as an adjudicator and what applicants can expect or should be thinking through as they put together their materials. But first things first, let's talk a little bit about what you're applying for in the first place, which is the summer program in instrumental music. So the first thing you'll see in the applicant guide is a program description of what it's like to attend GSA for instrumental music. I'm actually going to read this program description verbatim, and then we'll hear a little more from Dr. Bird. So GSA's instrumental music program is structured to introduce a broad spectrum of musical styles and philosophies, developing students' fundamental musicianship. Students are provided with a unique range of musical experiences not typically available to high school musicians. This includes participation in faculty-coached chamber ensembles, both classical and jazz styles, and in seminars about auditions, college choices, careers, practicing techniques, resumes, and competitions. In addition to weekly studies in music history and music theory, instrumental music students receive private instruction from GSA faculty or adjunct professional guest artists. Nationally recognized guest artists present workshops in the areas of performance and music-related career opportunities. Students also attend live musical performances and partake in off-campus field trips. The instrumental music program typically presents over 50 chamber music performances, solo piano performances, and various interdisciplinary collaborative performances with some of the other GSA disciplines on the final day of the program. So, Dr. Bird, tell us a little bit more about what we can expect if we're attending GSA for instrumental music.
Well, I think one of the most unique things about our program at GSA with instrumental music is that we stress the emphasis of chamber music at GSA. And you'll get a sprinkling of that in some other summer programs, but typically most summer programs or even other large-scale programs that happen during the course of the year, such as like orchestras that meet during the year, or like All-State and things like that are competition and audition based, they still emphasize large ensembles. It would be a band, orchestra, and things of that nature. And at GSA, we do not have a large band. We do not have an orchestra. We do all chamber music. So that's the thing that I think is unique about it. And what's special about that, not the fact that it's just that we have chamber music, is that that's where the development grows, where the student grows, and they're mostly in chamber music. Lots of independent learning and thinking and creative work comes out of all these rehearsals. We have, they're all coached, and then sometimes we leave the room after we've started you off where the students are on their own. So as opposed to other ensembles where you have, such as All-State or something like that, where you have a conductor in the room and everything is given to you verbatim and everything is cued and told you exactly what to do, we teach students to kind of teach themselves, to learn about how to make their own musical decisions and that type of thing. So that's what's really neat and exciting and unique about GSA. And so, like I said, when we work with the students, we kind of coach them and work with them ourselves as faculty. Guest artists come in, adjunct faculty come in and do coaching, and then we'll sometimes leave you on your own to come in. We'll come back a half hour and see what you've done. So I think that's the most exciting part about what Nick just read in that paragraph.
Awesome, thanks, Rich. All right, so jumping back to the applicant guide, we're going to review the next section, which is very relevant considering the timeline that we're on. This is section 2, describes preliminary round application requirements. So this is everything that applicants have to upload into their GSA application by January 10th. So you can see we've got this list here, A, B, C, D, E, F, of the various parts of your application. And the rest of this document, or at least this section of this document, tells you a little bit more about each of these. So to start off with this list, let's discuss the 2 recommendation forms. Now, again, we've discussed the recommendation forms in more detail in previous webinars, specifically, I believe, the applicant guide webinar. So I encourage you to check that out. There's a lot of information in the applicant guide here about the recommendation process. But long story short, you have to identify 2 recommenders. One is a school administrator and one is a teacher. If you have a teacher in your instrument, that's great. They'll probably be the strongest recommender for you. If you don't, that's fine too. Ultimately, this doesn't have to be a music teacher. It can be a math teacher if you don't have a music teacher, but it does need to be someone who knows you as a student. That said, Dr. Bird, tell us a little bit more about how you use these recommendation forms as an adjudicator, or what folks should be considering as they identify their recommenders and let them know that they'd like to have them recommend them for GSA.
Sure. Well, like you said, Nick, it's very important that you select people who know you well, rather than just somebody who's just has a reputable title in the school. It's more important that they actually know you personally well and know your work well. So whoever you put down for that, make sure that they know you and your work very well. And if at all possible, like I said, it may not be, but if at all possible, it'd be great if one of those would be someone who knows your work well as an in your art form, because they may know your work well as a student, which is great to show your work ethic and how hard you work and how diligent you are and how responsible you are. And those are very important things. We look at that as well, because if we see a math teacher saying how responsible you are and how diligent and how hardworking you are, and you stay after school and you do math, you know, clinics or championships or something like that, that's great too. It shows initiative. But if at all possible, it's nice to see on those recommendations someone who knows your work as an artist in your art form as an instrumental student. So whether that's a conductor from an ensemble you're in, or a teacher in band or jazz band or orchestra director, or your private teacher, or just anybody who knows you as a student on a regular basis and has worked with you in your art form. And the key is knows you well enough on a regular basis. Again, we just don't want to name drop and put down somebody who you worked with one time. That's great. Like sometimes you have these clinics you go to and a person works with you for that 1 day or 2 day. And I know you can get a lot of information out of that, but it's nice to have someone who has a track record of you who's worked with you week after week after week and can vouch for you and say things like, I read that say this student in the 15 years I've taught in band, I've never seen anybody work as hard as this student, or has been dedicated or devoted or whatever. And those things are meaningful to us. So again, find the person, the teacher in your field, and even if it's outside your field, who knows you really well, can talk about your longevity of what you've done over time.
Great. Thanks, Rich. And something else I always say to folks is keep in mind that when you reach out to your recommender, you can let them know why you think you're also a great candidate or why you're interested in GSA. Especially, we find sometimes as school administrators, there's a little bit of anxiety because people might be concerned that their guidance counselor might not know them as well as an artist, which first up, we don't ask your school administrator about your artistic skill. It's just your teacher recommender. Again, that's in the applicant guide. But we encourage you to let them know, hey, here's why I'm interested in this program. Here's why I think I'm a good fit, because that can really help your recommenders as well. So great. Let's jump back into the applicant guide and go on to our next section. So here we are in the recommendation forms area. Like I said, there is a lot of information in here for you to read. So take the time to review that for yourself. And the next section brings us to the personal short essay and the personal question video. So this is essentially 2 essay prompts that you respond to. One is written and one is verbal. So the personal short essay is a 250-word max response to the prompt, describe your personal connection to your art form or creative practice. Why and how is it important to you on a personal level? And then the second prompt you respond to verbally via a video. And that prompt is describe your vision for how your individual artistic work, creative practice can impact others. How do you want to affect others through art, and or what response do you hope others have to your work? And I really want to emphasize that this video can totally be created with a smartphone on your living room couch if needed. We don't expect you or necessarily even want you to go out and hire a professional video crew or anything like that. Of course, put your best foot forward, make sure you're lit well, you're in a quiet space if possible that we can hear you. But just know that we expect this to be pretty laid back and accessible. So Dr. Bird, tell us a little bit about how you use these as an adjudicator and what students should be thinking about as they put together their responses for these essay questions.
Sure. And I know you didn't read it verbatim, but the thing that I noticed, first of all, in that one paragraph is the most critical thing for you all when you're making these videos and writing your narratives is it just like it says there, to be open and honest and authentic. That's really what we're looking for. A lot of times, um, students and even with the good intention helps of teachers and parents, they try and lean over their shoulders and say, you need to write and like make this an English essay. You need to be like have this, proofed over and over and that type of thing. And of course, I mean, it needs to be understandable, of course, but it's just important to know that this is not an essay and English competition. So you do not need to worry about, not that you don't care that if you're misspelling words or have bad grammar, but it just needs to be understandable. But we're looking for your open, honest, and authentic comments about who you are as an artist, what interests in you, why you want to come to GSA. That's going to be more important to us than a well-crafted, well-crafted letter that pretty much doesn't tell us anything about you as a person. So yes, take the time to write a good narrative, to write a good essay, but make sure it tells us about you as a person and what interests you and what you're like and what your interests are. And the same thing with the video. Again, I know this is a serious, very competitive program, and we want you to take it seriously, but you don't have to. Again, this is not an audition for a role and a part in a movie or anything. So you don't have to worry. Of course, you'll probably look, you want to look nice and you want to speak clearly. But again, it's okay if it's not perfectly. As you notice, I'm speaking, I'm using, I sometimes fumble around for words, and that's okay. We don't mind as long as you speak openly and honestly about what you want to say. So if you want to write something out because you know that if you do speak, improvisatorial or just, off the cuff like this, that you find that you're floundering for words and then you get off and say, I can't believe I said that. Um, but we don't want it so scripted that it's really, we don't get a sense of you as a personality. But if that helps you get through it and those are your words and not someone else's words, then that's fine too. If you feel like you need to read it. But I think it's better if you just kind of speak openly and honestly about just what comes out, from your heart. And if you're floundering around, you don't like it, you can always tape it over. And if you find that that's still not working for you, then maybe you can write a few keywords or something like that. But when we're reading the narratives and we're listening to you, we're really just trying to get a sense of your personality. So that's okay if you've got a sense of humor, you want to let that show through. If you're kind of quirky, we're all kind of quirky because we're artists and stuff like that. That's all great. We just want to really see who you are as a person.
Awesome. Authenticity is key. I love it. All right, so jumping back over to our applicant guide and moving along from our essays. Up next is a brief section called art form specific questions. Just to speak to what this is new this year, but it's not a tremendous addition. You'll see in your application that we're just going to ask you a few questions about your level of access to training in music and your instrument, and also just your level of maybe different parts of instrumental music. So for instance, we might ask you, do you have a band or an orchestra program at your school, or do you take private lessons or not? And it's really, really important for me to emphasize, this is a very important point I'm about to make. There are no right or wrong answers to these, and we are not looking for a certain profile of a student over another. So if you have taken private lessons all of your life, don't be ashamed to tell us that in these questions. If you've never taken a private lesson or your school doesn't have a orchestra or band program, don't be ashamed to tell us that either. Every year, I'm willing to bet we accept students who fit all of the profiles I just described. So again, this is just a chance for us to learn a little bit more about you, what your interests are and what you've had access to, because that's going to help us understand your application in the fullest context possible. So I just wanted to take a moment to encourage you to answer this honestly and to let you know how we use those questions. All right, moving along to the juicy musical part of the application. So you will see here that we have our sections E and F combined. So basically, if you kind of zoom out and look at a big picture, everyone who's applying for instrumental music is going to have to upload a scales video and a prepared solo video. And there's an asterisk for percussionists which we'll come back to in a moment, because you will actually have to upload a scales and rudiments video, and then also 2 solo videos. But for the most part, everyone is going to be uploading scales and a prepared solo. We do have some guidelines here for all videos and all instruments, so make sure to read those. But as you scroll down, you're going to see that the applicant guide at this point for a while becomes separated based on what type of instrument you play. So for woodwinds and brass, we're going to have the outline, or the guidelines rather, for your scales video here, and the guidelines for your personal solo video here. Strings and guitar, the same for your scales and personal solo. Piano, scales video, personal solo video, and then percussionists down here, you'll see that we have the guidelines for you where you are providing 2 videos, or a total of 4 videos, 2 videos in each of the categories we've discussed. Basically, 1 video on a keyboard instrument, 1 video on a non-keyboard instrument. So there's a lot of specificity in this document. So again, take time to read it, ask questions if you have them, and just know that generally speaking, we're going to be looking for scales and a personal solo or prepared solo. So Dr. Bird, tell us a little bit more about these videos and what folks should be thinking about as they put them together.
Okay, I know you just said it, but you said we're okay with repeating. The first thing I'd like to emphasize to everyone, if you're taking notes, this is the most important thing right here. Please read all the directions and follow all the directions. We spend a lot of time writing these. It looks like an incredible amount of material there, and you're right. It is an incredible amount of material. There are lots of columns, lots of sections, lots of bullets, and every one of those bullets we're looking for. So it's not like you can overlook one where it says to play it ascending and descending, or to play it by memory, or to play it hands together, whatever it says there. Those are all accurate. And so you want to make sure that you just treat that like a checklist if you do that kind of thing. If you don't, it's something new for you to learn, is to get a checklist and actually literally check everything off after you've made your video, before you do it, and then after you've made your video, to make sure that you've done everything that's asked on it. Because when things are missing, that's what works to your disadvantage. Because even though you might be a great player, if you've missed some of the the points of the application that you did submit, then again the scoring will be less for you. So be very careful to read every single word there and follow every criteria that's asked on that. That's the first thing. Like I said, not only reading but following them. As far as the scales go, this has always been an interesting thing because I've know lots of other organizations that use scales, and a lot of times it's sort of like, if you do them great, if you do them close, that's good. But this is a very competitive program, and the great thing about recording something is that if you don't like what you did, or if you're not happy or satisfied to your personal fullest, then you can actually re-record it again. And the great thing about that is that you don't have to just say I'm done it 2 or 3 times. If you want to do it 30 times, you can take the time to do that. Depends on your level of commitment, or your desire to get into the program, because you are competing with other people who have that mindset, who say, I'm going to do this until I get it right. And so you might think, it's good enough they can kind of tell I can play scales. So what, I missed a couple here. I'm not going to spend the time to do it again. Well, somebody else might be spending the time to do that again. And so that might put them at an advantage. So since it's a recorded thing and you don't have to say, and no one's asking you how many times it takes to do it, then you should take advantage of that. But when you are recording, like I said, to follow every bullet there, the thing that we notice the most that I think is real striking is that obviously anything you play on your instrument should always be with your best sound. Sometimes people think, well, it's just the scales, so I don't need to play as nice with a good a tone and as musical as I would with my piece. And I'm sure a lot of you probably had band directors or instructors or teachers, private teachers, that say everything you play, whether it's your warm-up exercises, should always be done with your best sound, and everything you play should always be done musically. So even if it's just an exercise, should that be musical? And the answer would be yes. And even if it's just a scale, should that be done musically with a good sound? And of course the answer is yes. So not only is just the accuracy of playing the right notes of a scale measured and scored, but it's playing them in a musical way and with a good sound. So that's something that you want to make sure you consider if you haven't done before. The other thing we notice is that it should be an obvious, but it's not. Over all the years, like I said, I've been doing this for quite a long time, is that students don't tend to play these accurately in time. Like they're kind of, fast in some spots and slow in other, and especially if it's a little tricky on whatever fingering, bowing, or something like that. So make sure you play these in time. You're not allowed to play these with a metronome when you record them, but you should practice them with a metronome so that when you do record them on your own without a metronome, they will be played in time. So it's very critical for us to see as judges that you can play these scales, and we don't even ask all the scales. There are only 7 scales. But it's important for us judges to see that you can play them not only with a good sound and musically, but to play them in time and to play them all accurately. So try not to adopt the close is good enough mentality and say, unless that's just, where you want to be. But like I said, it does make a difference for scoring and so when you're comparing people to each other. So that's what I want to say about the scales. As far as the piece goes, as far as choosing your piece, is that okay, Nick, that I talk about that?
Please.
Okay. And I know, again, we've mentioned the requirements for the pieces, so definitely adhere to those. And then at the very end, I think Nick will mention this, we've got tips as far as selecting pieces and stuff like that. And a lot of times students and teachers are trying to figure out strategically what's the best piece to play. And so what I would suggest to everyone, first of all, is pick a piece that you do well, that is in your wheelhouse, that emphasizes the things you do well. Just a quick example, somebody played a piece one year that featured for a trumpet player, all double tonguing. And they did not do double tonguing well at all. It's kind of new to them, but it featured that. And so I had asked them in the interview, it's like, why did they select that? And they said, well, it's something I figured I need working on. And then, and well, I gave them props for that. It's true that, you should probably work on something that you're weak at, but that's not what you want to audition on. So emphasize again, I would put your best foot forward. Find pieces of music that highlight and emphasize the things you do well. Do you have a good range, a large range? Then find a piece that does that. If it's something that's very lyrical and you just are very expressive with your phrasing, find a piece that does that. If you're great with mixed meter and all kinds of rhythmic changes and stuff like that, find that kind of piece. But if rhythm is your weaker thing, then avoid that. So it just sort of makes sense, but sometimes people pick the wrong literature because it doesn't fit their strengths. So find something that fits their strengths. And then also, I know this is in conjunction with maybe you working with your private teacher, if that's the case, but sometimes they pick literature for you and it doesn't really move you or speak to you. So the second thing I'd like to emphasize is try and pick a piece that you like, that you enjoy playing, that you love to play, that speaks to your heart. And even if there's some challenging things about it, say, I just love this piece. So that's really, really important because that will come through in the performance. There are no points for bravery. So I need to emphasize that, especially to well-meaning teachers who think this is a great standard repertory piece that everybody plays and does really, really well at. If you want to get in, play this piece. Well, it's good advice if you do it well and if it speaks to you. But if you don't play that piece well and you don't really like it, that will come through as well. So while there are many well-meaning people that give you advice about giving you good literature to play, again, there's no points for bravery. If you don't do it well, it was a poor choice. So a lot of times people I can tell are good players and they have a lot of technique, a lot of experience, they got a lot of potential, but they're selecting or have for them selected the wrong piece of music because someone thought that it's a one of those war pieces that standard repertory pieces that should be played and will gain you the best advantage. And again, it will not if you don't play it well and you don't really are not into playing it. So that's very, very important for when you pick pieces. Otherwise, as far as all specific things, look at the requirements that we have, because sometimes people think, should I play? Can I just play my all-state music audition or something like that, or or something of that nature? The other advice I give for that, because we may not have said this, is that it's probably good for you to pick something that's actually a piece of music, not just an excerpt from something that you've done, and kind of show a little bit more diversity rather than something that you started to audition on months ago just for all state auditions and you're just pulling out again. I don't think that really shows a lot of diversity and depth and initiative on your part just to pull out music that you had to use for some other organization. So pick a piece of music, like I said, even if you've worked on it before, if you practiced it, used it as an audition another year, that's okay because you still are learning from it. But again, a piece that you think you'll do well, that will emphasize your good points, and that you love to play, and that will all shine and come through.
Awesome. Sage advice. Thank you. And I love that a lot of what you just said, I think it goes back to our conversation earlier about authenticity.
Yeah.
Choosing a piece that is authentic to you, like that you enjoy it, and also is authentic to your skill set and to your strengths. So I think that's pretty interesting that that's a common theme. Hint, hint, everyone. All right, so we'll go back to our applicant guide and keep moving along with our conversation. Again, don't forget we'll have time for Q&A at the end, so please put your questions in the Q&A feature as you have them. All right, so here we are at the percussion section of the preliminary round area, or section rather, of the applicant guide. So moving along, you'll see that the next big section is the final round requirements. We're not going to spend time on this today, but I just wanted to point out that it is in this document. This is a description of what will be asked of you if you are advanced and invited to the second and final round of auditions. Again, keep in mind that we're not yet sure if these are going to take place in person or virtually on March 19th and 20th, but just know that if they do take place virtually, what is going to be asked of you is going to be in the general spirit of what you see here. So go ahead, visualize your success if you want to be thinking about what you might have to commit for the audition process in March. Take a look at this, but for the time being, the previous section is what you have to get in by January 10th. So we're going to kind of breeze past this. But as we do, you may notice that it's also arranged by instrument type.
Can I interject one thing?
Please do.
I know this is, like I said, you probably don't want to dwell on this, but there is, if it comes to that point where we are doing those things that you mentioned on there, there is a prepared ensemble excerpt. And if that's one of the things that are on the auditions, it's very important for you to understand that that piece needs to be prepared equally, if not better, as the piece that you choose. And I say that just from experience, that I think that's a downfall, again, of a lot of applicants who prepare their piece that they chose really, really well. And then, of course, they get this ensemble excerpt piece, which is taken from the pieces we do during the summer. It gives us a really good idea of how good a fit you are in the program, because we give you some of the literature that we actually do during the program. And then some people have not really spent the time on that. I know you don't have months and months to work on that, but that's why we only give you 2 or 3 weeks on it to see if you can learn music quickly. Because I know we have a sight reading element, but this is even probably more relative to what exactly we do, because most of the time in the real world, you don't have music put in front of your face and you have literally 5 seconds to look at it and have to play it perfectly, which I know sight reading kind of tests that ability and kind of tests your tenacity as far as doing that. But this other thing is more relevant because you have a short time period, but still quite a bit of time to look at it. So it's important for you to understand that if that is not as prepared as well as, even though you don't have as long and learn as well as the other piece, that's something you want to really, really consider as far as you competing with other people, because that in just past experiences has not been as stellar as the others, and that usually kind of hurts the score.
Thanks for that. So the next section of our applicant guide is just as important as everything that we've looked at so far. It is the criteria. So this is literally what is on the adjudicator score sheet as they were reviewing your applications. This is what we're looking for, what you're being scored on. So in the criteria section, you're going to see each piece of a criteria listed, and then a description of how an ideal applicant exhibits that criteria. So you'll see rhythm, tempo, and evenness, technical accuracy, musicality, tone, and intonation. And then I also want to point out this piece of criteria, dedication to art form, growth, and community. Again, we're looking for folks who are excited by the idea of waking up every day at GSA and eating, breathing, living, sleeping, instrumental music all day long, 7 days a week for 3 days a week, for 3 weeks rather. We're looking for people who are interested in growing at GSA, interested in being challenged toward growth. If you know everything that you need to know and that you can ever know about your instrument, then this is probably not the program for you. And then we're also looking for people who can contribute to the GSA community in one way or another, because we are a community of artists at GSA. We're not just a school, we're a community. So this is actually one piece of our criteria, dedication to art form, growth, and community, that is present in all 9 art forms, just so you know. And there's another piece of criteria down here about sight reading. That's for the final round. You don't have to worry about that right now. And a couple other things about the criteria. These are not weighted. So one of these is not secretly more important than the other. We're going to use these contextually with your specific application to review you holistically as an applicant. So just know that these are not necessarily weighted. There's no secret equation behind any of this. And also, this is not just an FYI on what's on the score sheet for the judges. This is something that you can use as you put your materials together. So as you put your videos together, as you select your music, show us these things in your materials. If you're trying to choose between two solos or two recordings, ask which one shows these more, and that may help you make some decisions. So Dr. Bird, anything else you'd like to add about the criteria?
I think that's really well said. Like you said, mentioned contextually is very, very important. None of these are weighted. Um, the only other thing to consider is that when you're selecting your literature, like I said before, try not to play something overly simplistic that doesn't really give enough information about you, or something overly complex or heroic that you know is like a great piece, but you don't do well. So look at that criteria. And the other thing that's related to that, just to kind of let people know, is that I don't know if this is the spot to bring this up, Nick, but it's important for everybody to understand that we do not have a quota as far as instruments. Like when you have Allstate, you have these certain number of chairs to fill. And if they have to fill two oboes, by golly, if there's two oboes auditioning, they're going to put them in there. And we do not do that. So we will work with whatever students we get. So if we do not have the students selected on a particular instrument, that's okay. We will work without them that year. It would be ideal if we could have a standard brass quintet, a standard woodwind quintet, a standard string quartet, but there have been years that we did not have the applicants at the same level auditioning with their application as the other ones. So we did some years without, believe it or not, without clarinets at all, without um, any double reeds at all, without cellos at all, without, I mean, like I can go on. There's some certain years we just did without those instruments. They applied. There were plenty of those applicants who applied on that instrument, but they weren't selected because they, like I said, were playing chamber music, and everybody has to be very, very, kind of on the same page of that. And so that's very, very important for you to understand, despite any rumors you're here, because you're hearing it right from the judge, that there are no quotas. Now, we would like to have a representation of all the instruments, because somebody says, does that mean you would take 50 pianists and none of the other instruments if that happened? And I'm like, well, if that were to happen, I bet the lottery's better, easier to win than that. But if that's the way it would be, I guess we would work with that. But that's not the way it typically happens. And as you can tell from any given year, you will see sometimes more instruments than other. So while some instruments do appear to kind of come up year after year as far as two or three or four and say, well, there's a standard number. We might have a number that we like, but there is no quota. Just so that you know, you hear it right from the horse's mouth, there is no quota.
Well, and that's a great segue to another point I always like to make in these conversations, which is just that this is a competitive program to get into. And it's just something we like to talk about to be transparent, but also not to create worry or intimidation, but actually quite for the opposite reason. So there are 50 spots in our instrumental music program. It's our largest program at GSA of our 9 art forms. There are 256 spots at all of GSA. And for those 256 spots, we usually see about 1,400 applications. Now, again, I'm not bringing this up to intimidate anyone or discourage you from applying, but rather just to point out that there are not 50 gifted instrumental music students in Kentucky every year, and that's why we only select 50. Every year we have to turn away students who deserve this program, that we want to work with, who we know have a lot of promise and a lot of talent in their art form. So for some reason, if this doesn't work out the way that you hope it will, do not take that as a referendum on your level of talent or your future in the arts. There are a lot of amazing artists from Kentucky who did not go to GSA. We're a great program, but you are even greater, is what we like to say. So, and we like to say that because it's true. This application process is designed to be a resource to you, regardless of whether or not you get into GSA. So on the other side of this application, you're going to be more prepared for things like college applications, applications to other programs, just by virtue of the materials you put together. You're also going to learn more about yourself as an artist and as a human. So you've got nothing to lose, everything to gain. And so we just encourage you to apply, even though Those acceptance ratios may sound a little intimidating, but put yourself out there, and it's a part of being an artist, right? I bet if you picture an artist that you love and that you really look up to, I'm willing to bet that artist has been told no more than they've been told yes, but they still got to where they are. So we encourage you to put yourself out there, and remember, we want you to do well. We're on your side.
And to sort of piggyback on that, just to emphasize this as well, you really don't want to decide for the judges if you think a student is going to possibly be a contender for the program. I think everybody who wants to audition should audition, not just for the experience, as Nick was saying, because that's a great perk, but that you might actually get in. Sometimes people say, well, I didn't make All-State, or there's a ton of there's like 20 people ahead of me in All-State on my instrument, so there's no way I'm going to get in, because I know that GSA has a lot of All-State kids every year and blah blah blah, and so the rumors go on. But I'll have to let you know that I can name any given year people who did not make All-State or who do not have private lessons who are in the program. So it is, while it is, probably, obvious that if you're a hard worker and you get into all these different ensembles outside of GSA, that it's likely that you would probably be a good contender for something like that, because that's what, they tend to, they work hard for that. But just to let you know that just because you did not score well or didn't get to All-State, or because you haven't been taking the same amount of lessons as somebody else, does not exclude you. It's important for students to know that. It's important for parents. It's important for band directors and orchestra directors to know that as well, because sometimes they decide for the students they're not ready for it, and they shouldn't even bother to audition. And I think it's kind of sad, because I know there's a lot of people with lots of potential that could be in the program. This program is not the same as other programs. You saw the criteria, but it's a very holistic approach, and that's why the essays, the verbal prompts, the interview, if we do that on the live auditions, is very important. You don't get to do that in All-State audition. There's no interview type of thing. There's no essays and this type of thing. We're looking for a person who's a right fit, someone who's engaged, who wants to learn, who wants to be a part of this program, who wants to learn from others, who wants to have interdisciplinary experiences. So yes, talent is important, and you have to prepare, and you have to audition, and you're competing. That's all. I'm not going to downplay that at all, but it's equally important that you understand that there's more than just playing the right notes and right rhythms on the page. There's a lot that comes through an audition, and you as a person can show through and can shine through that as well by what you do and what you say. So if you're interested and you're a hard worker and you want to spend the time practicing for this audition, I definitely encourage you to audition, and don't let anybody discourage you and tell you that you're not ready for that, or you're not going to possibly make it, because that's not true.
Well said. Thank you, Rich. And I should have asked you this before we got into the webinar today, but just looking at our time, Dr. Bird, if we have to go like 5 or 10 minutes over past 5:30 Eastern, is that okay? Or do you have
Sure.
to run?
No,
Okay.
no problem.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're going to jump back into the applicant guide one last time to just review the last couple sections, then we'll begin our Q&A section. I see some great questions in our Q&A feature. So moving past the criteria section, again, we've talked about this earlier. There is a tips section at the end of this applicant guide that is super important. These are not just general audition tips. These are tips that we have come up together. Dr. Bird and I, we worked on these together based on this specific process. And this is a very robust tip section. I think it's probably the longest tips list of any of GSA's 9 art forms. So use that to your advantage. There's a whole section here about selecting your music. I see a couple of our questions that we have are about selecting your music. One question that's been very popular today that I want to point out is that we do say jazz and contemporary music selections are allowed, but classical literature is preferred. Avoid performing excerpts from previously used auditions, like All-State, as Dr. Bird mentioned earlier. So you'll have tips for selecting music, tips for recording your application, and so on. As a segue to the Q&A, well, before I ask that, I'm sorry. Finally, I just want to point out to you all that the very last thing in here is a timeline for the whole process, in case you need that reminder. So as a segue to Q&A and talking about selecting music, Dr. Bird, can you just tell us a little bit more about, selecting repertoire and it being, classical being preferred, and, are pieces written in the 20th century considered classical?
Yeah,
things like that.
I'm reading that too. I'm reading the 20th century. I read the can be a transcription. Um, yes, certainly any time period is great. Um, I'll just say yes to that. Any time period is great. Can they be a transcription? Yes, they can be. And and then of course people asked about jazz. Like I said, you can do jazz, and we have had people play some jazz pieces. There's nothing wrong with jazz. We do jazz in the GSA program, but I say you usually to avoid that because you have to be kind of careful what kind of jazz you're going to play. If you're just going to come in and play a really easy blues head and then just kind of jam a little bit, that may not still be putting your best foot forward. But if you got a really, pretty difficult technical and well, like a jazz transcription of a very famous jazz artist or something like that, and you perform that well, then that might be a good a piece to play. So it sort of depends. That's why we sort of avoid that, because sometimes jazz, which is a big category, or just contemporary or pop music, may not be the best choice, because sometimes somebody will come in and play a very easy version of Singing in the Clowns on piano. Probably not the best choice to do to compete with other people who are playing Mozart, Beethoven, Liszt, Rachmaninoff, and that type of thing. So not that there aren't complicated or good 20th century, or I should say, sorry, contemporary jazz pieces. It's just something that you have to be very careful about. So it doesn't say you're not allowed to. It's just you want to avoid those for the reasons I'm mentioning. Transcriptions are okay. It's I think it's better as judges if you try to find something written for your instrument, because there are a ton of pieces written for everybody's instrument, rather than going outside of that. Unless there's really a reason, again, if you think it checks all the boxes, and it's like, well, this is something I love and it's the best, shows all the best highlights that I can do, then I think that's fine, because we'll judge anything on its own merit. But a lot of times, like I said, transcriptions, it depends on what they are. It's there's so much literature usually in your area on your instrument. That's, I think you've got a lot of selection there. Does that, I think, cover everything as far as, Nick, that you're thinking about for selecting literature?
Yeah, I think so. And I'll just point out that, Dr. Bird was giving us some great advice earlier about following guidelines. And I'll point out that what we don't do in the applicant guide is say it is forbidden to use transcriptions. So I think the way that you can use that information is, if you are thinking about using a transcription or thinking about a jazz piece, which again, we very intentionally do not say absolutely no jazz, right? That's a choice that we made, and we made it with intention. So if you're thinking about that transcription, or you're thinking about that jazz piece, or wondering if your 20th century piece is classical or not, again, don't forget to use the criteria to help guide you. So if you're trying to choose between two pieces and you're really struggling and wondering if one is going to break a rule or not, again, if we are not telling you that you explicitly can't do it, then you have permission to do it, most certainly. Again, just use the criteria to your benefit. And the directions that we're sending you in are just because it's generally the directions that we've seen most people successfully complete their criteria in. Another question related to things like transcriptions and choosing instruments is someone's asked specifically in this situation about clarinet, although I think this is applicable to other instruments, as well. So let's say you play both clarinet and bass clarinet, but bass is your passion and your strength. Can you audition on the bass clarinet?
Yes, I saw that question too, and absolutely. If that's your passion, your strength, and you think you will do a better service on your audition playing bass clarinet than B flat clarinet, then go for it.
Awesome. Let's see. On the scales video, are we allowed to play chords after each scale?
No, I think because that's just extra time going to be involved for the judges to listen to it. I think it's nice, but since we're just listening for the scales, it'd be best just to do the scales.
And
And
again, oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, they mentioned something else about scales, resting between scales, or quickly playing straight through them. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by quickly playing through. I mean, after you've done a scale, after you've come back down, dun, da, 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 and then pause again and just play another scale, it's enough. Just enough to rest. You don't have to go into it in less than a second. But, after you're doing 5, 10 Mississippis in between scales, that might be a little bit too long. So, just enough to breathe and do the next one is quite sufficient. You don't have to race to the next one as if it's in time in the same piece of music.
Fantastic. I'm going to try and answer some questions that are maybe not as instrumental music focused, while we see if any other questions come in. Although, Dr. Bird, if I say anything you want to chime in, just let me know.
Sure.
So you have to upload a picture of yourself, or we call it a headshot, in your application. That does not have to be professionally done. Again, sort of like your video essay, that can be taken with a smartphone in your house. Again, make sure that we can see your face, make sure that you're lit well, but we understand that, especially right now during this pandemic, we're all at home doing the best we can. So just make sure that we can see you. It's okay if you're turned slightly. It's okay if you're smiling, if you're not smiling. Just let us, maybe see a little bit of your personality in that photo if possible. But that's just a simple photo, nothing too complex there. Let me see here.
Someone asked about applying on 2 instruments. Do the essays and video questions have to be different? It can be the same. And of course, if it's with instrumental music and there are 2 instruments, they don't have to be different. It could be the same essay, the same video, because really nothing's probably going to change as far as your answer for instrumental. But certainly, if you applied for instrumental music and another art form, you should do a different essay and a different video, I would think, because you need to talk about that art form. I mean, you could
Yeah,
use the same one, but just strategically, I would think you probably ought to do one that kind of fits that art form. Unless you think it's so generic, it fits both perfectly. I guess you can make that call, but that's what I would think.
yeah, absolutely. If your answer is true, if your authentic answer to those essay prompts is the same for each art form, you can definitely use the same video and it's the same essay. I'll tell you a little secret. If you apply for instrumental music and musical theater, Dr. Bird over here is never going to see your musical theater application. So he actually won't even know whether or not you've submitted the same one. But again, this comes back to what we talked about earlier, right? Authentic answers that are specific as possible. So that's definitely up to you. We have people go either way on that every year. And just know that choice is in your court. That ball's in your court, whether you want those to be the same or different based on what your art form, second art form is.
Somebody asked a question, idea of how many years people who get selective actually practice their art. And I'll tell you, again, that varies. I've had people, and you've heard this before, has only been playing a couple years on an instrument. And we asked them, how long you been playing? And it's like, only 2 years. Have you had any lessons? No. And it's like, wow. I mean, but sometimes people are just have a natural knack for things. I've had some people who've studied on lessons for 9 years, and then and you wouldn't know it necessarily. So, to answer your question, I mean, somebody who's a sophomore, junior, somebody who's been typically taking lessons, approximately about 3 years is what the norm is, as far as if you want an average of what people have done. But again, if you're looking at it's like, oh, I've only done 1 year, I'm at a disadvantage. That's not the case. And I've had people done over more than 3 years, and you think they give them an advantage, and it's not necessarily the case either. So it really depends again on the individual, because some people are very self-motivated and quickly learn because what they take, they just eat up like just a hungry animal. They just like absorb it and they can't wait to get back and to get more information and practice. So a number of years is not necessarily the best barometer, but if you want a number, about 3 years is what people have typically practiced their art form. But I've seen, like I said, as few as 1 or 2 years, people getting in who've only been playing their instrument that long or even studying and longer as well.
We also got the great question about feedback on your application, specifically if you're a sophomore and you don't get selected, but same goes for if you're a junior and don't get selected, can you get feedback on your audition? And unfortunately, that's not something that we're able to provide. More than anything, that has to do with just administrative capacity. With 1,400 applications and 9 different art forms, it falls on the administrative staff to provide that feedback. And that's just unfortunately something that we don't have the capacity for right now. So certainly wish we could do that, but unfortunately that's not a feature of our process. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think one thing in lieu of that, what you could do is, as much as you can, find somebody who is who understands your art form and do a practice audition for them and get feedback from them. Even if it's a person you've been working with as far as your teacher, your ensemble director or something like that, set up a date and a time with them to say, I'd like to run through the actual audition that I'm going to record or do live for you and get feedback that way. Because musicians are going to be sharing about the same criteria, especially if you show them the criteria that GSA uses and say, if you take this criteria and listen to me, how would you score that and give me some feedback on it? And I would be willing to bet you that a lot of that is going to be overlap. Like what they would have to say using our criteria is going to be very similar to what we might say if we were to give you criteria right away. So that's a good thing that I advise everybody to do, is set up a mock audition for these people, give them the criteria that GSA has, and have them take a pen and paper and check that off and talk to you afterwards about it.
That's a great idea. Someone asked if it's possible to change who you've asked as a recommender. Another version of this question we get a lot is, oops, I put a typo in my recommender's email address. Can I change that? Absolutely, you can. Just email us at gsainfo@kentuckyperformingarts.org, and we'll get that fixed for you. We have to fix it on the back end of your application on our end, but we're happy to do that. So just shoot us an email and let us know what that correction is. Again, at gsainfo@kentuckyperformingarts.org.
There's another quick one I saw. They asked about playing a solo written for another instrument, such as if they play like an alto saxophone, because I said there's usually plenty of literature. Now, obviously, the saxophone has not been around as long as some of the other instruments, but there are a lot of literature pieces written for those. So I still would try and go for finding saxophone literature that's probably obviously going to be more in the last 100 years or so than you are going to find something 300 years ago, since it wasn't invented then. But I would still go for that more than trying a transcription, or to play. Sometimes the saxophonist will play something written by Purcell from the Baroque period, and maybe that's the one that speaks to you most, and that shows all your highlights again, using that as a criteria. But if possible, I think you ought to try and find something that's written for your instrument. And obviously, a saxophone has not been around as long as others, but you could say the same thing for maybe tubas and some of the other instruments that have not been around as long as a violin.
Awesome. Somebody did ask, it sounds like they know folks who have gone to what we have called art shops in the past. They want to know if this is the equivalent of an art shop. So for those of you who don't know, GSA over the years has had various different types of programming during our recruitment season. One version of that was what we call an art shop. That was like an on-site, in-person workshop. So we are not doing anything in person this year, and the only recruitment programming that we are doing is this virtual info session series. And so if you're watching the beginning, I kind of went over the schedule of all of those. So you're in the right place. If you are wanting to know about GSA and experience our recruitment program this year, this is where you will need to be for instrumental music. This is the most time we're spending on the instrumental music program. And if you have other questions about different parts of the program, I encourage you to review the recordings of virtual info sessions that we've recorded so far this fall. We still have some coming down the pike as well, so you can register for those. Rich, I see we have a couple questions about videos again. If there's multiple measures of rest in a piece, like up to 6 measures or more of rest, should they just skip those or count all of them?
Yeah, definitely. I thought it was in the criteria that I mentioned, is that anything 2 measures or under or less count out fully, and anything above 2 measures of rest, then you can just take a short rest, and we're not counting. We're not, if it's 3 bars or 30 bars, we're not going to be counting those out. But anything less than 2 bars, definitely count that 1.5 measures out, or especially if it's just 1 beat of rest. I have to say this because it happens with so many people. They'll shortchange. There'll be a dotted half note in 4/4 time, and there's 3 beats that they're supposed to hold it. And I know this is very technical, and 1 beat rest, and then they play the next measure. And a lot of times people drop all those little beats of rest, even if it's a half beat or whatever like that. So that's really important. And I do mention that because that happens a lot. I'm glad I got to say that, because there's a lot of people, all of a sudden their rhythm scores go definitely lower because of that. And it's like, why are they doing that? So 2 bars or less, definitely count out. Above 2 bars, just rest what you need.
Great. And I'll quickly answer a question we got from a percussionist who just wanted to clarify for your rudiments or drum set styles video. That's correct. We give you sort of 3 categories that you can choose from. So you can submit that video for drum set, or timpani, or for snare drum and multiple percussion. And each of those have different guidelines for them. So you can choose one of those and just adhere to those guidelines. Dr. Bird, tell us a little bit about guitars at the summer program. How do we integrate them? What's it like for guitarists at GSA?
Guitarists do, again, it's sort of depends on the clientele that we get, depends on the personnel, the students. A lot of times we've had a jazz ensemble, but sometimes we may not have had it. I think over the last several years, we've always been able to have some type of jazz ensemble of some type. And a lot of times of guitarists, if that's something they're interested in doing, or we feel might be a good fit, or if they're, have that background, then they might play in an ensemble such as that. Sometimes we have some chamber ensembles that they might play, but typically for guitarists, they're more in the classical vein. So while it is great that you can do both, acoustic guitar is going to be more chamber ensemble with like flutes or just other instruments or something like that. Bass guitar might be a little different because we've got some pieces that have been commissioned for us, pieces I've written, pieces GSA alums have written that have involved many of our standard instruments, brass or woodwinds, and rhythm section, like piano, bass, and drums. And so the bass guitar can be used in something of more contemporary nature that's not jazz and not pop, but more contemporary like. And so if you're a bass guitarist, there are a lot of crossover opportunities. If you're an acoustic guitar, electric guitar is not used as near as much maybe as bass guitar in that capacity. Because sometimes, again, we have interdisciplinary projects with maybe musical theater and playing a musical, and then sometimes you might have electric bass guitar used there. But so again, I would suggest really focusing more on classical music for either for acoustic guitar and bass guitar. And if you do both, let people know, let the judges know, and then if you have an opportunity to showcase a little bit of that as well, that would be great. But otherwise, I'd focus on the classical.
Great. Awesome. Well, I'm going to ask one final question from our Q&A feature. Then I've got 2 questions for you, Dr. Bird, to close us out today. First off, the question that just came through about the application, do you submit the application separate from the videos, or is it all together? And the answer is that it's all together. So you will upload your whole GSA application or application portal, and you can start it and stop it and come back to it, save it, come back to it. And there's a whole webinar where we walk through the application portal from beginning an application all the way to submitting it. So that's available on our website. So I encourage you to check out that recording to just get a sense of what the whole process looks like. But it is all in one place, and you upload it at the end by January 10th. Although, please listen to this advice: do not wait till January 10th to upload your application, unless you are staying up really late that night, because it probably will run pretty slow, the system, as you upload your videos and submit it, just because we will see a lot of people submit their applications on January 10th. So do yourself a favor, get it in there maybe by January 7th, January 6th, and enjoy your spare time on January 10th. So Dr. Bird, 2 final questions for you. First off, if somebody is taking in all this information about GSA, but they're still really on the fence about whether or not to apply, maybe they just feel like it's a lot of work, or they're not sure if they're good enough, what's your advice to someone who's not sure whether they should
apply? Like I said before, I mean, if you really want to audition, I think you should. I think it's definitely worth the time and efforts and energy. Now, if you don't want to practice and you don't want to put time in, then obviously you probably shouldn't do that. It's like, is it okay if I audition and not practice and not, put, my best foot forward and really not spending time doing that? I think you know the answer to that. But, if it's something that you're passionate about and you're very interested in doing, and you really want to see what you can do, I think you definitely should go for it. You may run out of time. I know it's like you don't have months and months and months to do this. You might be thinking, how can I possibly put all this stuff together in a great piece and stuff like that in that amount of time? But again, I think I would, if I were you, I definitely would just go for it and not let the opportunity pass it up. It's important for sophomores to understand, because I hear this all the time from juniors who apply, and I said, when we were doing the auditions live, and I asked one of the questions, did you apply last year? And they said no. And of course, sometimes we'd like to know why. Is it just some circumstances or something like that? And a lot of times they say, well, I just didn't think I was ready, or I just didn't have time to get it together, and that kind of thing. And what they miss from that is the opportunity to go through the whole process. Even if you think that you know in the back of your head, I know that I'm going to give it my best go, but I know that I'm not really going to have the time to put together a really good audition package, and is it really a good benefit of my time and judge's time? I still think you should go for it and do it, because the experience is invaluable. Having gone through it once, is going to help you out for the next year. Having not gone through it at all is not going to give you that advantage. Because I know a lot of people after I hear them just thinking, man, if they just went through it last year, I think they would have learned a lot from it, and then take, good or bad, and then taking those valuable learning lessons and applied it for the next year that they audition, even if it's just, if you never got to do the live audition. I know we're in a pandemic and all that stuff, but just put together a tape just to go through the act of doing that kind of thing and realizing, wow, that was a lot more stressful, a lot harder, and took more time than I thought it would be, or something like that. But if you don't do that the first year, then you won't know. So definitely I would encourage you to do it.
Well, and we have all these amazing young artists with us today, maybe watching this live or maybe watching this recording later. So regardless of whether or not we end up getting to work with these amazing young artists at GSA, Dr. Bird, what's one thing you want them to know, or one thing you want to say to them?
You definitely should. I mean, this is just one program among many. I love this program. I hold it to, a high level of, of experience and expectation, and it's one of my favorite things that I do. But it is still just one program of many things you can do in your life. So whether you audition and get in, or audition and don't get in, or don't even audition, that's not as significant as fact as you should probably continue your art form. If you love arts, we need good artists and all art forms, and the world needs people to share, for you to share your music with them. And I think it's important for young artists to keep developing and keep growing and keep following your passion in music, and spread this, this art form that you know and love and do best in whatever capacity that comes your way down the pipe of life. So whether it's GSA or not, that's great if it is. If it's not, it's still great, because you're going to pursue other avenues. GSA is just one avenue. It's a great avenue, but there are other great avenues. And so keep pursuing your love and your passion of music, and never let that die. If that's something you want to do, don't let anybody stop you. I remember once, I'll have to say this, I used to watch a show. It was called The Partridge Family. I don't know if anybody remembers that. It's a blast from the past. It was in the 70s, I think. And I remember, if anybody knows the show, there was this talent agent came on. I think he was talking with the lead guitar singer, Keith, and he was wanting to know if he could make it or something like that. And the guy told him, he asked him, he said, well, if I told you that you shouldn't pursue it and you shouldn't, pursue your art form, would you stop? If I said you should stop doing it? He goes, well, I guess probably, because like, you're such a great person, and I admire you and everything. He goes, well, if that's the case, you probably should stop, because if it takes somebody like me to do that, just one person's idea, no matter how great or famous a person is, then maybe that's not the best thing for you. But if that's something you want to do and love to do, don't let anybody stop you. So that's what I'm saying. Whether it's an audition or someone else telling you, man, you're not good enough, don't let those voices come into you. Let your own voice come through. And if that's something you want to do and you love, keep going at it. And because, like I said, the world needs it.
Yep. And if you do it for yourself, that's the best possible reason you can make music, right?
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, don't worry too much about what other people think about your music, because if you're making it for yourself, that's really the most important to make it. But like Dr. Bird said, make music like the world needs it, because we do. So
Yeah, and like you said, during this time of pandemic, a lot of people are doing, or musicians are making a lot of music for themselves. They're playing in their home a lot more for themselves than they probably ever have before, and are finding new things about themselves.
yep, yep, absolutely. All that extra time to practice your instrument at home, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bird, for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
We appreciate
Enjoyed it.
your feedback and your advice and your input. For those of you watching today, just a reminder that if we didn't answer your question, or if you have a question that comes up, we are here for you every day to answer your questions. So just shoot us an email. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. And just remember, you'll see that survey pop up when we end the webinar today. Please take that. It's super helpful to us. So keep making music. Let us know your questions. Dr. Bird, take care, and we'll talk to everyone later.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.